Hello. This is my third and last talk in this series about discussing nutrient management decisions when fertilizer costs are high. So we are going to deal with nitrogen today. The current situation in Iowa is well known. We have record high fertilizer prices with which we get lower economic benefits from investments in fertilizers. Now, we are lucky that the crop prices are pretty good. These are the best times for using manure nutrients, of course. Now, I will not talk about this, but this is something that everybody should have in mind. This is the times when the use of manure nutrients is more profitable and more convenient. Now, farmers need to reduce fertilizer inputs rationally, not just cut across the board. For nutrients such as PK and lime, soil testing is not perfect, but it is a very useful diagnostic tool in order to come up with pre-plant fertilization rates. With nitrogen, the issue is much more complicated. There is more uncertainty. There are no reliable pre-plant diagnostic tools, but we do have some in-season tools that can help us decide how to complement the pre-plant application. Nitrogen management for corn is very challenging, not just for corn, but for any crop and everywhere, not just in Iowa. Nitrate in the soil profile and the transformation of organic nitrogen from about planting time to around silking are key factors determining the need for additional nitrogen that the soil does not supply. Then we have the soil microorganism change of organic nitrogen and ammonium nitrogen to nitrate is greatly affected by the soil moisture and temperature during the season. Nitrate is very mobile, is easily leached with rainfall, and much of it can change to gaseous forms in soils that are waterlogged. They don't need to be flooded. They just been waterlogged for a few days so we can get denitrification. The nitrate is changed to gaseous forms. So because of this reason, there is very large temporal variation during the season. There is little carryover from one year to the next, except with drought, but when there is drought in the fall and also in the spring. Otherwise, the profile nitrate has been shown not to be a good measurement that could help us decide the nitrogen rate. This is very important, because for P and K, if some people apply excess P or K to the soil or excess lime, okay, that will be there for the next crop. But with nitrogen, most likely, it will be gone. So it is very difficult and uncertain, the prediction of the optimum rate for specific fields and years. Now, the objective of this talk is to present, to review some of the guidelines that we have and provide clues about how to make the best of this situation. It's not the objective to review or justify every single thing that we are saying. There is no time. These are 4 of the key extension publications that we have for nitrogen. They are free to download. You can buy them if you want to have a nice colored hard copy from the Iowa State University Extension store. Also, you can access them through our soil fertility website. I put the link there to the website. Crop 3073, that's the main publication. Dr. Sawyer updated it in 2018. So that has most of the clues and suggestions in terms of how to deal with the decision of pre-plant nitrogen rates for corn. On the top right side, we have publication PM 2015. That publication, I think it was from 2004, 2005. That is important because one of the things that we are, the options we have in terms to decide N rates for corn is the concept of the maximum return to N and the corn nitrogen rate calculator. And so this publication explains the basis for that, why it's done like that. And this was prepared, together with 7 states of the North Central region that we are following the same general guidelines. On the bottom left, we have crop 3140. This is the publication for the late spring soil nitrate test. This publication was updated about 2 years ago. Both Dr. Sawyer and I have been working with this since the late 80s. And we included lots of data and suggestions in terms of how to use this test. On the bottom right, we have the publication PM 2026, which is kind of old but still relevant, where Dr. Sawyer discussed some of the concepts related to using remote sensing to detect N deficiencies and to provide clues about additional N rates. So this is important because I will not have time in this talk to refer in detail to all the things. And especially the 2 publications below, those are in season diagnostic tools that can be used to adjust the rate, during the season. Okay, let's start with some information. Of course, nitrogen fertilization is almost always needed for corn. And the rotation has a strong effect on the nitrogen needed. This is well known. Now, these are examples from long-term crop rotation at the Northern Research Farm. This experiment has been conducted since the late 50s or 60s. And but the rates and the sum of the rotation were changed in '84. So we are I'm presenting data on the left graph. Those are averages for some of the rotation, not all, the most important ones, from 1985 through 2020. And in the right side is the result for the same rotations, but during the last 4 years. I averaged the last 4 years to kind of smooth annual variations, but I will show those later on. So these on the right are from 2017 and 2020. Okay. What we see there is that these letters that we have, C, O, O, A, A, etc. C means corn, oats is oats undersown with alfalfa, and then A is the alfalfa year. So we have there these 3 rotations. Starting from the top is corn after 3 years of alfalfa. Then we have the corn after the oats undersown with alfalfa. Then we have the corn soybean rotation. And finally down we have continuous corn. In these slides, all the nitrogen was applied using granulated urea, incorporated with tillage and applied in the spring. So we can see there is a clear effect of the alfalfa. It's a legume that fixes nitrogen from the soil, so it uses less nitrogen and leaves some residual for the corn. There is a very clear effect of the oats, even though that alfalfa undersown with oats, it's essentially it doesn't produce much in the first year. And then we have the consumer rotation and the continuous corn. Note that across time, with the continuous corn, we never go to a plateau, to a maximum yield. And I have been debating if we should change these rates, which probably we should, but see, these studies are sacred, have kept all this monitoring for so many years. So when one makes changes for a while, we screw up. So I didn't change it. Now, over the last 4 years, on the figure, on the graph on the right, we see the same trends, except of course the yields are higher. But we still see that especially there is a clear rotation effect, okay? For the corn after alfalfa, corn after oats, corn after soybean, essentially we get to almost a maximum yield with 160 pounds of nitrate, 160 to 240, but with continuous corn, we never go to the maximum. Probably we would need about 20, 30, 40 pounds more. I forgot to say that in this rotation, the nitrogen is applied only before corn, okay? There's no nitrogen applied to the oats or to the alfalfa, of course. So we have a clear rotation effect. One interesting thing from this study is that it has had two continuous corn rotations, okay? One, the urea is applied in the fall, incorporated, and the other is the urea is applied in the spring, also incorporated, okay? So again, we have in the two graphs the long-term average since 85 until 2020, and on the right, the average for the last 4 years. So the long-term average shows that we expect, and we have been observing for many years, that the application of all nitrogen, we get lower yield than with the spring application, especially when we use urea. But it's interesting to show that over the last 4 years, this was not the case. Essentially, it was about the same. When one study all the responses since the first time the treatment were applied several years, decades ago, about 1/3 or half of the years, there is no difference between the fall and spring application, but in many years there is, and that's what results in these average numbers there. Okay, this is another study. These are the two longest rotations that are in Iowa, and this study is in the Northeast farm. And the rotations, some of the rotations are common, some are different. In this case, all the nitrogen is also urea, and for all rotations, I mean for corn only, it's applied in the spring. So we don't have the fall applications here. We do have a rotation that includes corn silage, but I'm not showing that here today. Okay, on the left graph, okay, we have since the averages in the study began. This started more recent than the other one. It started in 1979 until 2020, and we have some rotations, and the meaning of the letters is the same as I described before. The important thing here is that the alfalfa, corn after alfalfa, is only after 2 years of alfalfa. And then we have in blue the response for the second corn after this alfalfa. And then we have 3 corn-soybean rotations. This is unique all over the United States. We have corn after soybean, year after year. Then we have 2 corn after soybean, and then we have 3 corn after soybean. And the capital C indicates that's a corn after soybean always. And then below, we have a bunch of rotations in black, and we see that for some of these things, the rotation didn't make much difference. For example, the red lines and responses show that it doesn't matter if the corn is after, in the rotation that is just corn soybean, or we have 2 corn and soybean, or 3 corn after soybean. It's the same thing. And then for the black lines and symbols below, we have the continuous corn. Then we also have the second corn after alfalfa. Now, remember, after soybean, I'm sorry. And then we have the second corn after alfalfa and the third corn after soybean. So these two important things here, that the rotation effect essentially for a second-year corn or third-year corn after alfalfa, the nitrogen is about the same as for continuous corn. Okay. Now on the right, we have what happened over the last 4 years, 2017 to 2020, the averages. We see about the same results, but we do see that at this particular site, the yields and the response increase much more than in the other side in northern Iowa. The soils are different, the rainfall is different. So it is very clear that there has been a much higher yield increases, in general for all rotations. And we see also that in contrast to the other side, although we do not get to the maximum yield with the 240 pounds rate for continuous corn and all these other rotations that are similar, but the difference are less, are smaller than we saw in the other side. Okay, before we start talking about nitrogen for corn after corn or corn after soybean, which I think is the key for Iowa, I'd like to just talk a little bit about this slide about the guidelines for corn after alfalfa. We have a fewer number of trials over the last 20, 30 years than for continuous corn or corn after soybean. So in publication 3073, that one that I showed before, we have this table that put together the result from these rotations, but also several other experiments on farmer fields, with corn after alfalfa. And so essentially what we say there, we say that we divide in first year corn alfalfa on second year corn after alfalfa. And then the first year corn after alfalfa, we have different suggestions for coarse texture soils, sandy loam soils, fine texture soils, like silty clay loam, and then the medium texture falls there. So for several of these rotations, the results that we have show that really is not the nitrogen needed is not much different from the corn after soybean. So we can use those guidelines. I will talk about that later on. But in fine texture soils, for the first corn after alfalfa, we recommend either 0 to 30 pounds of nitrogen per acre. So that is well known. If the alfalfa stand is still good, and we have 3-4 years of alfalfa, we need very little nitrogen for corn after alfalfa. And for the second year corn, we generally believe that should use the guidelines for corn following soybean. I think is the best bet. So that's what I'm going to say about corn after alfalfa or pastures. We have more information in that publication. Okay, now I'd like to emphasize the temporal variability of response to nitrogen, yield and response to nitrogen, okay? Using these two long-term experiments, which are nice because it's the same site, the same soil, the same conditions over time. So on the left graph, it's complicated, but this is what reality is. We have the 4 rates that we applied and the corn grain yield for each year since 1985. So since 79. The key things there is that, one, the white squares below show the yield without nitrogen. So this has have no nitrogen applied since 1979. And so you can see it's kind of flat. There is very high variability, but kind of flat. The yields have not decreased so much over all these years. The other thing is that the response to these 3 rates that we have tended to increase over time. If you look the first 2, 3, 4 years, you see that the yield with the rates of 80, 160 to 140 are about the same, very similar for some of the years at least. But then when we go to the right, to to the last few years, especially since around 2000, 2005, we have that the yields and the responses are higher. But the main thing, is the tremendous variability, you see. And remember, this is the same site, okay? Of course, the hybrids change over time, but this shows, that what I said before, the prediction of the yield and the optimum end rate for corn is extremely difficult. Now, on the right, what I did, I estimated the economic optimum end rate for this, which is kind of approximate because we have only 4 rates. But it's okay because almost always we achieve the maximum yield with the maximum rate used. So we can see there the variation of the rate of nitrogen that was optimum after the fact changes greatly over time. The variability is huge. But also note that in this site at least, there was a steady small increase in the rate over the last 40 years, okay, since 1980. Now, for that line, that regression line, I excluded those low points, that are in black. Those were mostly very drought years or excess moisture, so I took them out from that line. But definitely, there has been an increase over time of the end rate. However, if you look over the last 4 or 5 years, actually it was a decline. Of course, that depends, on the climate. So rainfall, moisture in the soil, and so forth. Okay. In this slide are the results for the other sites for the northern farm. In this case, from 1985 until 2020. And we show essentially the same thing, how the control essentially show stable yields lower yields, but not a clear decreasing trend over time. And then the effect of the rates, the difference between the rates increase over time. Now, on the graph in the left, I show you the optimum end rates, how the rates that were optimum yield and economic is. We see that the trend to increase the rate is much lower than in the other side. And for that line, I excluded those 3 points in black that were for drought years or years with excess rainfall. Now, one interesting thing from this side, and I put these 2 things together, is how the maximum yield related to the rate that was optimum in each of the years. So, for example, in the graph on the left, in the y-axis we have the maximum yield, okay, for each year. And then on the x-axis below is the end rate that was optimum each year. So in the northern research farm site, there was absolutely no relationship between the yield level and the rate that was optimum. That small decrease was not statistically significant. Now, on the right graph, we show for the other side, for the Northeast Research Farm, in which we saw that much higher yield increases over time and much higher increases of the rate that provides the optimum, and there is a clear increase. Now, it's not that very good, and then again, you see, as I said before, if you look at the years since about, for the rates between 200 and 250, they were kind of flat, Okay, so the yield level is not a good index of what may be the optimum end rate for corn. That's an old concept that is not used anymore. For the last 30 years, no state of the North Central region uses the yield goal or the yield in terms of deciding the end rate to apply. Now, I like to spend some time on this on the concepts that are behind the responses of nitrogen and the tools we have to provide guidance, about the nitrogen that may be optimum. So this is what we call the law of diminishing yield response to additional N increments, diminishing yield response or diminishing net returns too. And this is for any nutrient, okay? So the key issue is that when we put, like in this case, okay, we have in blue, the blue bars are the yield with no nitrogen, and then we have the yield with increasing nitrogen rates at increments of 20 pounds. Okay, so the key issue here is that the increase in yield from nitrogen application is a curve, it's curvilinear. So start increases fast at low rates, and then the increments in yield to each additional nitrogen increment becomes smaller and smaller until there is a plateau where essentially no more nitrogen is needed, there is no change. Now you can see this very clearly by looking at the black squares. See, with the black squares are the tallest, with the first 20-pound increments and the second increment 40 pounds, but then becomes smaller and smaller and smaller. This is very important, and this is behind the concept, the main for the main way that all the states of the North Central region makes guidelines about nitrogen fertilization for corn, because this response is curvilinear, okay, up to a plateau. But if I had put here the line of the cost of fertilizer, of course that would be linear. See, so there is a point where when we start applying too much nitrogen, given the diminishing increments in the response, then we get lower net returns to the application. Okay, this is important to understand several of the things that I will show next. Now, the key issue is the maximum return to N concept. And most of you should have heard over the last 10, 12 years about the MRTN, maximum return to N, and this concept, and also the corn N rate calculator. Okay, now this is not really new. The concept of the maximum return to N is not really new. That comes from a continued N field response trial with several N rates, since cropping conditions, hybrids, and climate keep changing. Okay, now 1 or 2 years of information is useless. As you saw, the variability is so high. So we need to consider the previous years, and this could provide a clue of the probability for certain N rates to be optimal. Okay, the main difference with this concept, which is old, is how it is implemented. Before, every 4 or 5 years, we have trials, and then there was a written publication with the suggested rates and so forth. Now, back about 2004, 2005, mainly Dr. John Sawyer from Iowa and Emerson Nasfiger from Illinois, and then with other states, we got together for about 2 years to discuss this, how to come up with a common system for this to provide nitrogen guidelines. And then the difference is that now we have that in a website where farmer consultants can just go to the site, to each state, and essentially provide the N prices or corn prices that they want, and then see what do they get. So this is updated every couple of years. We cannot do that for a matter of cost and because of the annual variability. So we have updated it. The last time was about 2 years ago. So we are working to update it at this time. Okay, this is the rate calculator, and I'm going to go in detail, mainly for those people that have not used it, okay, people that have not visited. I think it's a very, very important tool that people should go, and it's very easy to use, okay? So essentially, this is the first window that shows up, and in the bottom, we show there the 7 states that we have decided all to go with this system, each with its own data, of course, because the conditions change, okay? So the first thing you see is there are 2 options there. Either do you want to include just one price ratio, so the price of fertilizer and the price of the corn, or you want multiple scenarios, okay? So if you click on multiple scenarios, you get four different possibilities where you can enter different prices, okay? So I chose first single price to make things easier. Now, here, this looks complicated, the second screen, but it's complicated only because I decided to put all what's in the different menus. What you have to do is first to select the state. I selected Iowa, but you have there the 7 states, and you can just go there and pick what they say in Minnesota or Ohio or whatever, okay? Once you select the state, in Iowa, as sometimes in other states, we have two regions. Research during the last 20 years mainly have shown that in southeast Iowa, the optimum end rates tend to be a bit higher than in the rest of Iowa, most likely because of the higher rain in that region. So we have the main Iowa, which is most of Iowa, and then southeast Iowa options. I chose Maine. Then you can choose here on the upper right top, you can choose either corn after soybean or corn after corn. I selected corn after soybean. Remember, this is important because in the following graphs, they're all for corn after soybean, you see, because corn after corn, you need at least 50, 60 pounds higher, okay? Now, then you choose the fertilizer that you're using. And we have those fertilizers, hydrous ammonia, the 2-UAN, urea, and ammonium sulfate. Now, I chose anhydrous ammonia. Now, the reason we have those fertilizers there is not because of different efficiency. There is lots of research. There is no clear difference as long as each of these fertilizers is applied as they should, being in the fall, in the spring, incorporated or not, etc. But the reason we put them there is because the price, the price per ton and the price per pound is very different for these nutrients. Usually it is. So I chose anhydrous ammonia. Then because I chose the single price scenario, either you put either the price per ton or the price per pound of nitrogen. I just put the anhydrous ammonia at 1,200 pounds. That is not the highest that people paid last fall, but it's high. And then I put $5 corn, just to be a bit conservative. Then you click calculate, and then this is what shows. And I cut some of the screen, the window is wider, is larger. But I just cut it some so you can see what I put here. This, again, this is the result of what you selected. On the left, we have options about the size of some charts that will be shown. I chose medium. And then below, I checked all those options, for displaying charts. The key issue here is that this is information that essentially you provided and the results according to the data. So the one key issue is note that the MRTN rate is there. It's 125 pounds for these options, okay? That's the rate that gives the maximum economic yield, most likely given the data that we have, okay? But then the other line, you will see that says profitable end rate range. So this system gives you flexibility because there is no way that we can pinpoint just one single rate, and there is so much variation and variability. And of course, we are looking at what happened in recent years versus what may happen in the future. So in this case, the rate is from 115 to 136. So I'm going to explain a little bit that. This is important. Okay, this is what the graphic shows when you choose a single range. The blue line in the top is the gross return, okay? It's the net return dollars per acre without discounting the fertilizer price. The green line, which is linear, is the fertilizer price. Of course, as the rate increases, it goes up. And then the orange line is the net returns. And that's why I spend time in that first slide, those green, black, and green bars, because this is what it shows that, you see. And there is a range of rates where the return to application is highest, and actually there is a small region there that's kind of flat. So these are why the program shows you this range of profitable rates, you see. So what we have the center diamond is the MRTN rate, the maximum, the rate that gives the maximum economic yield. And then the two sun dogs on each side encompass the rates that provide either minus $1 less per acre, see, to kind of represent that small area where we cannot predict with more accuracy, okay? So those are the range that this gives. And if you try this with several prices, you will see that most often that range is plus or minus 10 to 15 pounds per acre of nitrogen. That means that the total range is about 20 to 30 pounds. So you can make decisions based on this. Depending on your stomach or your attitude toward risk, you can use, the MRTN rate for pre-plant fertilization, or you can use the lower sun dog or the higher sun dog. You see, that's up to you. Okay, if I had pressed in the multiple, then this is what it gives you. This chart with 4 lines, and it puts only the end return. Otherwise, it would be a huge, complicated graph. And then in the top, the blue is with cheap N, and the bottom with expensive N. You see the level of the profit changes, and the rate that gives that most likely end rate to provide the maximum economic yield changes. Now, on the right, I put something that I think is important, because people have this belief that by choosing the MRTN rate, they may be getting a yield much lower than the maximum yield. So I put there the 4 scenarios, and you see that the yield attained by the end rates there is the MRTN rates goes from 97 to 99% of the maximum yield. So if you are essentially shooting for the maximum economic yield, you are at the same time shooting for maximum yield. It's very, very, very small, the difference. Of course, it's smaller, the difference with cheap N than with expensive N. Another thing that this calculator shows you is, based on the information we have, the frequency of a specific rate, how many times was the optimum end rate. You see, the rate that provides the maximum economic yields. So when you click the 4 scenarios option, it gives you a complex graph. So I just decided to make it simple, and I use on the left the cheap N option, and on the right the expensive N option. So if you look at that, they look about the same. So there are very, very few sites that you have a rate that was an optimum rate that was less than about 75 pounds. And there are very few sites that we have a rate that was an optimum rate that was higher than 175 pounds. So the vast majority, that's the typical bell curve, shows that there is a range of rates intermediate. Now, as you can see here, the most frequent rate, okay, there for this scenario is 100 to 125 pounds, okay? And then for the cheap nitrogen, you will see that the upper range, which is 125 to 150, is about 22, 23%. But the lower range, which is 75 to 100, is only 14%. Now, if you look at the expensive end, that things change because you see that these two ranges around the range that gives the maximum are about the same. So this is what you need to use, in order to decide, because, as I said, it is almost impossible to predict accurately the pre-planned optimum end rate for corn. So there is much flexibility, and it's good if you look into that. Now, this is the graph relating the optimum yield with the optimum end rate, and it shows essentially the same that I showed for these two long-term rotations. Now, in this case, there are many more trials, you see, so it shows that across overall, there is no good relationship between the yield level and the optimum end rate. Now, as I said there in the text, if some farmer has fields, they have consistently high yield levels, of course, they can gamble, quote, and apply a bit higher rate, not because it's needed or it likely will be higher, the optimum rate, but because they can afford to gamble with consistently high yield levels. Okay, Dr. Sawyer put together, he retired last January, he put together this from the end rate calculator and shows the same thing that I show for the two rotations, that the end rates have increased slowly over the last couple of decades, from 2004 to 2018. Now, the blue graph is for continuous corn. Of course, we need more nitrogen. And the red graph is for corn after soybean. Now, as I said before, there is variability. Yes, there is an increasing trend, but in this case, you can see the same thing that we saw in the two rotation study, that over the last 3-4 years, it has been flat. We are working in order to add the 2019, 2020, and 2021 data, so you can see how it happened. Okay, inhibitors. There are all kinds of inhibitors out there and brands. I'm not going to mention brands, but I will just mention the two classes of inhibitors that can be useful, with good prices or bad prices. One group are the nitrification inhibitors, okay? These products attempt to slow down the change of ammonium to nitrate by the microorganism. And by doing that, there is the nitrogen stays as ammonium longer. The ammonium leaches much less easily than nitrate. So this could be a good thing to use, especially when the nitrogen is applied in the fall, but also when the nitrogen is applied very early in the spring. You see, the effect of these tend to be decrease over time. The component gets inactivated. Okay. The other one is the urease inhibitor. These are used especially are targeted for urea and be granulated or liquid. And the idea is to reduce the volatilization as ammonia, mainly when the urea is applied without incorporation into the soil. And what it does is inhibits the activity of these enzymes, which is everywhere, urease, and so that reduces the rate at which the urea changes, and in some conditions may reduce the ammonia volatilization losses. Of course, if we apply the urea and you get a nice rain, a day, 2 or 3 days later, then it will not do much. It's not needed, but in general, it's a good thing to use. The other concept is this issue of the split spring, pre-plant, and side dress application. There has been lots of research in Iowa and in the North Central region. I will not show data. We have in our fertility website all kind of data, and also in that publication about nitrogen management for corn. So the main thing about this is that we do not suggest that you apply all the N rate at the side rest time after corn emergence. So always need to apply some N pre-plant or at least starter, even for corn after soy. Now, all the data shows, not just in Iowa, in the north central region, that if the total N rate is used, you see, for the split, there are no consistent yield or nitrate loss differences for splitting the rate between spring pre-plant and side rest. Of course, if the split is part in the fall, part of side rest, yes, there could be a difference there, as I said before. Now, this is because in 1 year it's better to split, the other year it's not. So it is very variable, depending on those variable conditions that I talk about. However, the split applications can work if the farmers apply an MRTN rate or a conservative rate pre-plant, and then use in-season diagnostic tools to decide if additional nitrogen is needed. You see, by doing this, some years you don't have to apply anything, and of course if you apply too much pre-plant, you cannot take it out. But if the years are such, rainfall, etc., that your conservative rate pre-plant wasn't enough, then you can apply nitrogen, and this can reduce, in many years, the total rate applied, increase profits, and reduce nitrate loss. So the in-season adjustment then rate, we have essentially now 3 tools, the farmers can use with different degree of success and uncertainty. So what I recommend is to apply an MRTN rate, either the MRTN rate or the upper sundog or the lower sundog, as I explained before, or a conservative pre-planting rate, and then be ready to use some of these tools in order to decide if additional nitrogen is needed. Okay, one is the one that I call the simplest and more rough way, which is side rest some nitrogen when there is excess rainfall from April to about early June or June. Okay, obviously there will be more nitrate leaching, and then it's very likely that you will need additional nitrogen there. The other is the late spring soil nitrate test. I will not be able to discuss in detail, but it's in that publication that I mentioned. It's well explained, the methods and how to sample and how to interpret the results. The other is remote sensing, and as I said before, sensing for nitrogen deficiency in corn, but has to be after V10. See, V10 to V14, something like that, can complement rainfall information to dribble an additional nitrogen if needed. Now, you need a high boy, of course. You can dribble UAN. However, one issue with this remote sensing is that it doesn't indicate excess nitrogen, which the late spring soil nitrate test does. Okay. And then there has been work in models for nitrogen for 500 years. And now we have here Dr. Sotirios Archontolis is working in the Department of Agronomy, has been working for a while with this model APSIM. And seems that he may come up, with some model that with inputs that looks promising mainly for decided complementary post-plant N application. But as I talked to him about 2 weeks ago, he said, I'm not ready yet, but this may be another option for in-season adjustments in the future. Okay, this is the rough relationship between spring rainfall and the potentially additional nitrogen need. Dr. Sawyer worked a lot with this, and this is for the essentially the main area of Iowa, as I said before. He had some other information for the southeast Iowa. Now, this chart is complicated. John loves this type of graphs. He made this, but I think it's very useful. On the y-axis, we have the MRTN predicted rate minus the actual observed in trials economic optimum nitrogen rate, okay? So when it is 0, that means that we're exactly the same. The predicted or the usual most likely rate was exactly the same as the actual. If we go up, okay, that means that the MRTN rate was higher than the observed optimum economic rate. If we go down from 0, that's the other way around. Means that the optimum rate was higher than the MRTN rate. So what this shows, and that vertical line shows that at about 15.5 inches from April through June, there is a nice break. You see that in the top left quarter, the rainfall correctly indicates that you need higher rates, and in the lower right, then you don't need more rates. So, as I said, you can spend time looking at this graph. It is in our soil fertility website, so you can take a look at that. But essentially, it's very rough. You see the distribution of the red points. It's very rough. But what we can say is that if you get more than about 15.5 inches, most likely you will need some additional nitrogen, more nitrogen than the MRTN predicted, and then you will need less if you have less rain. But it's very rough. So okay, but it's one way that we can adjust that. The other is a late spring nitrate test. As I said, I will not describe it. It is in that publication. The key issue here is that the information shows that when you have a 25, 30 ppm or more, there is very little chance that additional N is needed. Now, this test is not too accurate to indicate what's the amount that need to apply if the test is below that. Okay, but we provide some suggestions in that publication, and also some adjustment if there is some more rainfall than usual. Now, it is also important to consider as any soil test, this is need to be careful with the sampling and sampling error, spatial variability. So for this test, the variability is especially high. So you need to take extra samples and extra course per sample, especially when you have spring injected anhydrous ammonia or liquid swine manure, or when you have spring applied solid manure. That's when the variability will be higher. So these graphs show some of the worst case scenarios for this test. These graphs are in the publication Crop 3140. So on the left, we have the late spring test when different rates were used in pre-plant using liquid swine manure. On the right, when solid manure was applied. So if you look there, this is like if you have a half empty cup of water or half full cup of water. If you have a test about 25 parts per million or less, it means you need more N. As I said, we cannot exactly predict how much is needed, okay? But we provide some guidelines in the publication about what to do. But if you have about 25, 30 parts per million, okay, there is essentially zero probability that you need more nitrogen. That means that in many years, you can, by applying a conservative rate, you can actually save money because you will not need to apply more nitrogen. Not only save money, but also can reduce nitrate loss to out of the soil to groundwater or surface waters. Okay, the other remote sensing. This is very complicated. Dr. Sawyer did lots of work. Many people in the North Central region have been working with that. There are some companies there that offer this service. Of course, the farmer can also buy these things and do it, but essentially there are all kind of images, aerial photos, satellite, drones, active canopy sensor mounted on equipment, etc. And there are many indices. See, essentially, all these photos can measure different wavelengths, and then these are some of the indices which are ratios between different wavelengths that can be used. Most research suggests that the two in the center, the green NDVI and the green chlorophyll index, probably are best specifically for detecting nitrogen deficiencies in corn, but the others can work too. Now, Dr. Sawyer worked a lot with these active sensors. Active sensor means that the machine, the gadget, sends some radiation to the canopy and then measure what is reflected. This tends to be better than just interpreting the normal radiation coming from the canopy. So he worked with those there. And now it is very important. Two things are very important, is that you must use a reference area with non-limited nitrogen in each field, okay, in order to calculate some relative sufficiency indices. And the other thing is that, as I said before, they do not indicate excess nitrogen applied. So you may have a huge excess nitrogen applied pre-plant or something, and then this will not detect it. But still it's useful at least to tell you if you need more nitrogen or not. They are not very good in order to tell you how much you need to apply, but at least you have a clue that you may need more nitrogen. So this is why, this is Dr. Sawyer's work, why you need a relative index. This was using the green NDVI, you see, in the chart on the left. This is the absolute, even if it is active sensor, okay, but was not adjusted with a reference with high nitrogen. On the right, you see that the relationship is much better. And this plateau, especially on the right, after this zero, he expressed the differences, their response as different from the observed optimum and rate. So you can see that it doesn't tell you when there was much nitrogen applied. So, in summary, nitrogen management for corn or any crop is very difficult. There is much uncertainty. Many out there still are using the very old, 30 years old recommendation to use the yield level or the yield goal, okay? That doesn't work. There is no state in the North Central region that recommends that anymore. And you saw the reasons. I explained why. The other thing is that there are no reliable diagnostic tools to decide pre-plant end rates. So that's why in Iowa, we decided, and in those 7 states of the North Central region, we have decided years ago that in order to provide most useful guidelines for pre-plant and fertilization, we can use this concept of the maximum return to N and the corn end rate calculator, because they provide the most likely range of economically optimal rates for 2 Iowa regions based on field trials. Then we have these in-season adjustments. And I believe that this is where we should focus most of our research, because it doesn't matter how much effort will be, there will never be good tools to decide what is the pre-plant end rate, especially if it is applied in the fall, but also in the spring. So we have that I show. Just look at the late spring rainfall and then see if it was higher than normal. You may need to apply 40, 50 pounds more. And then using these 2 in-season tools that we have for now, the late spring soil nitrate test and remote sensing. Now, about remote sensing, of course, there are companies offering this service, and you need to go by what algorithms they use. So, there are not many, but slowly are growing, and different companies are using this service. So what we recommend then, especially with high fertilizer prices, is to apply a pre-plant rate that is one of the MRTN rates, the lower, the highest, the center one, or a conservative rate. So then you can come in the spring when you know what's going on. And then you can use some of these tools to decide if more nitrogen is needed or not. With that, thank you very much. This is my phone number, my email address, and then, as I said before, please go visit our soil fertility website. We have lots of information there, talks, articles, etc. And also visit the N-rate calculator website. I think it's a good idea. Thank you very much.